Michael grew up in a little town in Union County called Roselle Park. He attended parochial schools for elementary school and then Marist High School in Hudson County. And he stayed in Hudson County attending St. Peter's University when he attended college. After leaving college, he attended law school at Rutgers Newark School of Law. He did well in law school to achieve law review and also to secure a clerkship with Justice Thomas Scatino of the New Jersey Supreme Court, which he enjoyed tremendously. After graduating law school and his clerkship, Michael went into private practice, working at a law firm called Clapp & Eisenberg. He became a partner there. And then not long thereafter, he was invited by John Degnan, who had become Attorney General for Governor Byrne, to join the Attorney General's office and head up the litigation unit for the Division of Law. He moved up within the Attorney General's office to become Director of the Division of Law and ultimately to work most closely as First Assistant Attorney General with the Attorney General.
I had the great good fortune of working with him at the Attorney General's office on a variety of matters under his supervision. He was really a mentor to me and a hero in a lot of ways. He was a unique combination of principle and pragmatism. He had a deep sense of values in pursuing what was right and just. I recall on many occasions when I was in his office at the Attorney General's office and we were looking at a particular legal issue and you sort of wanted it to go one way, but he was, set clear, we gotta do what the law says, and these are not issues that we push left or right on, we just go right down the middle. And that was who Mike was. He was right down the middle, a straight shooter, and had tremendous integrity.
When Governor Kane was elected to his second term in 1986, he invited Michael to leave the Attorney General's office and join his staff as chief counsel.
I was first aware of Mike Cole before I ever met him. I was involved in the closest election in New Jersey history. And Jim Florio and I basically battled ourselves to a tie. And so we had a long recount process. And of course, both parties were particularly nervous, particularly the Republican Party, because the Democrats under Brendan Byrne were in charge. And so the rumor was, of course, they got to fiddle around with the election, you got to lose it, And then I found out the person Brendan Byrne had put in charge of the whole election scrutiny was Mike Cole. So I started asking some questions about who was this guy Mike Cole. It didn't matter who you talked to. Everybody said, you can't have a finer human being than Mike Cole. Nobody worried about hanging chads, nobody worried about all that stuff in New Jersey because of Mike Cole, because both parties absolutely trusted him. And so I got to know him. And when my counsel, Kerry Edwards, decided not to serve another term, I didn't have much worry about who I'd pick. Mike Cole was by far the ablest attorney in the entire state government.
Before, he had always been an attorney, advocating, litigating, arguing appeals. Now he was in the role of serving as a legislative liaison on behalf of the governor, trying to secure bills, working with members of the legislature on both sides of the aisle. To the extent he may have had any trepidation about that, he certainly put those concerns to rest with the great number of successes he had while he was working with the governor, including the work that he did for legal services.
Mike was a regular guy. He was very unassuming and self-effacing, but he was a very, very talented lawyer. He was as bright a lawyer as I have met in New Jersey. He was also, I found, be very tolerant and respectful of people who had different views, especially in today's time period where so few people respect others who have different views. Mike was a stark contrast to that. He had the ability to persuade people to accept his views, but he certainly did not impose them.
Not only Mike had a deep understanding of the importance of legal services, but Mike, more than that, he could convince you of that. I mean, when we first started talking about legal services very early in my governorship, really, but Mike was involved even at that point because he was an advocate. I wasn't quite so sure sometimes because legal services at that point, I don't know what it was about, but it was suing the state. So Mike explained to me why the suit was justified. Went back before my time in office, an older suit, I think, and why legal services is absolutely essential. He had that kind of integrity, he had that kind of persuasive ability. You couldn't have had a better advocate.
You don't see this combination too often of people who have both a deep sense of ideals and a deep ability to be pragmatic, and that was Mike. And he brought that capacity to legal services. As the board chair, he recruited a board of extraordinary people, many retired Supreme Court justices, leaders of the bar, leaders from the Bar Association.
When Michael left government in 1989, he said to people at the time that he wasn't interested in doing any lobbying work. He had decided to return to private life, to private practice, and he just didn't have a stomach for lobbying his former colleagues in the executive and legislative branches. But in a speech that he once gave, he said he broke that vow only once, and that was to lobby for legal services. I still have that speech because it was one that was memorable to all of us who heard it. I saw it before it was delivered, but it's always most moving to hear the words come out of the person's mouth. He said, "I'd like to think that I am a man of my word, but I did break that vow. I broke it, but in one respect only. I became involved in a cause that captured my mind and my heart, and that was Legal Services of New Jersey. Legal Services became the one cause for which I was proud to advocate and lobby. Becoming its advocate was easy. Talking to legislators and public officials about the necessity of legal services was like giving a civics lesson." That was something that he said often, particularly after he was involved in lobbying for the bill that raised filing fees and helped restore funding for legal services when funding was cut at the federal level. That was a dark moment for legal services. Michael was chairperson of the board at that point. He and Dee had quite a lot to grapple with.
The Republicans had taken control of the House and Senate and were trying to cut off funding for local legal services programs such as Legal Services of New Jersey and its affiliated organizations. Mike, who was the chair of the board at that time, was instrumental working with Dee Miller and the rest of Dee's staff in raising money to compensate for the federal funding that was being cut.
Michael's idea was to put a bill in the legislature to raise filing fees and to dedicate those filing fees to restoration of funding for legal services. So he went to the leadership in both parties, in both houses of the legislature, and asked each of those 4 individuals personally to sponsor the bill. It was quite a bold move. I believe he went to Speaker Collins first, and Speaker Collins readily agreed to sponsor the bill. I may have my order a little bit off, but I know when he went to speak to Assemblyman Joe Doria, who was the minority leader of the Assembly, Assemblyman Doria said, "Sure, I'm happy to support that bill. Sounds like a really good bill. I'm proud to support it." And Michael said to him, as repeated to me, "That's not good enough. I want you to sponsor it, and I want you to co-sponsor it with Jack Collins." Assemblyman Doria agreed, and he did the same thing on the Senate side. Senator DeFrancesco, the Senate president, readily agreed to sponsor the bill, and then Michael went to the minority leader, John Lynch, to discuss the merits of the bill and why Michael wanted Senator Lynch to be on the top of that bill with Senator DeFrancesco. It was one of those times when a civics lesson was used to talk about the importance of legal services, and Senator Lynch readily agreed to Michael's request. It was a wonderful move. The bill passed right before the budget break and was signed into law. It secured $8 million to restore funding to legal services that had been wiped out as a result of the federal action.
You know, Mike was all in. Mike didn't hold back. There was never, oh no, I can't do that. I'm too busy. It was always, legal services has a mission, and it's an important mission, and we've got to pursue it to the max.
We are profoundly grateful to Mike Cole. Without his leadership and commitment over the years, legal services would be but a shadow of its current form. All of us in legal services in the state owe a debt of gratitude to Mike Cole for the past, for our current, and for the future generations to come.
Michael said in this speech that serving with legal services staff, the Board of Trustees, and ultimately for a while as chair of the board was one of the most important endeavors he had ever done in his life. And considering a man who had held so many significant positions and done so much in his life, I think that sums up best how he felt about the importance of legal services. It truly was near and dear to him and his life.